In the dim silence of this vast classical archive, illuminated only by a single green-shaded banker's lamp, I turn a heavy page. The year is 1869. We are in imperial France. A forgotten chemist named Hippolyte Mege-Mouries is working frantically under a strict government mandate. Emperor Napoleon III needs a cheap, stable fat supply to feed his massive military machine. What nobody knew at the time was that this localized military experiment would trigger an unstoppable global catastrophe. It would fundamentally reshape human anatomy and birth modern corporate manipulation. This mundane creation was oleomargarine. It became the ultimate tool for corporate greed. This is a dark story of absolute economic power, structural control, and the corporate theft of human biology. To truly comprehend this global shift, we must first look into the visceral horrors of the pre-industrial past. Before the advent of mass-produced cheap substitutes, natural dietary lipids were a strict marker of wealth. Real dairy butter was a precious commodity. It was entirely out of reach for the expanding global working class. The rapidly growing industrial cities of the 19th century were trapped in a profound nutritional crisis. Places like London, Paris, and New York were swelling with millions of impoverished laborers. These people lived in cramped, dark tenements without any form of artificial refrigeration. Dairy products had to travel for days from distant rural farms on slow horse-drawn carts. The summer heat turned these shipments into a biohazard. By the time butter reached urban markets, it was frequently a decomposing, putrid mass. It turned a sickening shade of yellow-green. It bubbled with active bacterial growth. The stench was reminiscent of rotting animal carcasses. Yet, human biology is uncompromising. The human brain is composed mostly of structural fats. The human body desperately requires dense caloric energy to survive. Factory workers were enduring grueling 16-hour shifts in freezing, damp textile mills. They absolutely needed lipids to keep their bodies moving. Because fresh dairy was an impossible luxury, the urban poor turned to the lowest grades of animal waste. They purchased rancid tallow. They bought cheap lard harvested from diseased livestock. They even consumed grease scraped directly from industrial factory equipment. This was a desperate, daily struggle against metabolic starvation. Merchants quickly realized they could maximize profits by selling completely spoiled fats to the desperate public. To mask the stomach-churning odor of rotting animal lipids, these traders turned to criminal chemistry. They regularly mixed the decomposing grease with heavy quantities of toxic white chalk. They added caustic slaked lime to neutralize the acidic stench of rot. They even poured harsh industrial chemical bleaches into the foul mixtures. This process turned the gray, contaminated sludge into a deceptively clean product. And no, I'm not making that up. Unsuspecting families fed this chemical poison to their young children daily. The human cost of this adulteration was devastating. Mass gastric infections tore through urban slums every single summer. Tens of thousands of infants died in agony from severe, uncontrolled dehydration. Adults suffered from chronic, agonizing stomach cramps and systemic inflammatory diseases. Their teeth rotted out. Their skin turned a sickly, pale gray color. The urban proletariat was literally poisoning its own organs just to fuel the machinery of early capitalism. It was a bleak, melancholic reality. The physiological desperation for lipids is deeply rooted in our evolutionary history. Without sufficient fat intake, the human body enters a state of acute metabolic crisis. This condition is historically known as rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. When humans consume only lean meats without fats, their livers cannot process the excess nitrogen. This leads to severe, unquenchable diarrhea, extreme fatigue, and eventual death within weeks. In the freezing winters of Northern Europe, fat was the ultimate line of defense against the elements. The wealthy elite feasted on rich pastries, roasted pork, and heavy cream. They possessed thick layers of healthy subcutaneous fat that insulated them from the bitter cold. Meanwhile, the destitute masses suffered from chronic fat deprivation. Their skin became dry, cracked, and highly susceptible to painful fungal infections. Their joints became stiff and arthritic due to a complete lack of essential fatty acids. This stark bodily contrast created a deep social hierarchy based entirely on lipid consumption. Governments across Europe watched the health of their urban populations collapse with deep political anxiety. Malnourished citizens made very poor soldiers. The French military found that its conscripts were physically weak, short, and prone to rapid bone fractures. A nation cannot conquer territory with a starving, sickly army. This realization turned the fat shortage into a critical national security issue. Scientists of the early 19th century did not understand vitamins or micronutrients. They only understood raw chemical bulk. Michel-Eugène Chevreul was a pioneering French chemist who isolated stearic and oleic acids. His breakthroughs allowed people to view food as mere chemical building blocks. This scientific reductionism laid the groundwork for industrial food substitution. Food was no longer seen as a product of nature. It was viewed as a puzzle of fat molecules. Napoleon III knew he needed a solution before launching his next military campaign. He offered a massive cash prize from the imperial treasury. The financial incentive set the stage for Hippolyte Mege-Mouries. He was not a wealthy corporate businessman. He was a modest, obsessive researcher working in a small, poorly ventilated laboratory. He spent months experimenting with fresh beef suet and skimmed milk at the imperial farm in Vincennes. He even added chopped cow udders to his mixtures. He mistakenly believed that mammary tissues contained a secret enzyme that converted body fat into dairy fat. Through endless trials, he managed to separate the liquid olein from solid stearin. He mixed this clarified animal lipid with milk and water under precise temperatures. The result was a smooth, pale, glistening emulsion. He named it oleomargarine due to its pearly appearance. The name was derived from the Greek word for pearl. In 1869, the French government officially awarded him the prestigious imperial prize. It seemed like his fortune was permanently secured. However, history is remarkably cruel to lone inventors. Think about that for a second. Within months of his triumph, the devastating Franco-Prussian War tore Europe apart. The French Empire collapsed almost overnight. Napoleon III was captured on the battlefield by Prussian forces. The state funding for Mege-Mouries' revolutionary project vanished instantly. The factory he managed to establish briefly in Paris was quickly requisitioned by the military during the siege of 1870. The starving citizens of Paris were forced to eat his early, unrefined batches of oleomargarine to survive the brutal Prussian blockade. They spread the gray, tallow-flavored paste on pieces of stale sawdust bread. It was a visceral survival mechanism born of absolute military necessity. When the war ended, the French public associated the product with the intense trauma of starvation and military defeat. This psychological association completely ruined its domestic market potential. It forced the broken inventor to look across the border for foreign buyers. The inventor found himself isolated, deeply indebted, and utterly unable to build his own factory. Desperate for survival, he sold his brilliant patents for a small sum to a Dutch dairy family named Jurgens. This family would later use his genius to help form the global corporate behemoth known today as Unilever. Hippolyte Mege-Mouries never received the fame or immense wealth he truly deserved. He watched from afar as foreign corporations made millions of dollars from his intellectual property. He sank deeper into severe depression and absolute isolation. In 1880, he died in a cold, miserable room in Paris. He was completely destitute and entirely forgotten by the public. His body was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave among the city's poorest outcasts. The tragic death of its inventor did not stop the momentum of industrial fat production. The corporate world had already tasted the immense profitability of engineered food. The next massive evolutionary leap occurred at the turn of the 20th century. This breakthrough would completely sever human food from the natural agricultural cycle. A German chemist named Wilhelm Norman was experimenting with liquid lipids in 1902. He discovered that pumping hydrogen gas into liquid oil at extreme temperatures altered its molecular structure. By using a volatile nickel catalyst, he could permanently solidify liquid plant fats. This chemical process was called hydrogenation. It was the birth of a terrifying new industrial reality. Suddenly, Factories no longer needed animal slaughterhouses to create solid dietary fat. They could use the cheapest, most abundant liquid vegetation on Earth. Corporate eyes immediately turned toward the American South. The massive cotton industry was producing millions of tons of cotton seeds every year. At the time, these seeds were considered an incredibly hazardous, toxic industrial waste product. The crushing mills produced a dark, bitter, foul-smelling liquid that was totally unfit for human consumption. Textile companies routinely dumped millions of gallons of this toxic sludge illegally into public rivers. The sludge choked local waterways and caused massive, catastrophic fish kills. State governments were passing urgent laws to fine these companies for environmental destruction. The cotton industry was desperate to get rid of this toxic byproduct. What nobody knew at the time was that this environmental poison would soon become the primary ingredient in dinner recipes. Corporate executives realized they could transform this liability into unprecedented financial gain. Two enterprising businessmen named William Proctor and James Gamble watched these chemical developments with intense interest. Their company specialized in manufacturing household soap and candles from animal lipids. They quickly bought the exclusive American rights to Wilhelm Normann's hydrogenation patent. They realized that hydrogenated cottonseed oil looked and felt exactly like expensive lard. In 1911, they introduced a revolutionary new consumer product called Crisco. The name stood for crystallized cottonseed oil. They did not market it as a chemical substitute. They marketed it as a scientific miracle that was cleaner and healthier than traditional animal fats. They gave away millions of free cookbooks to unsuspecting housewives across America. They spent unprecedented fortunes on beautiful, manipulative magazine advertisements. The strategy worked with terrifying efficiency. Within a single decade, millions of families completely abandoned natural animal fats. They were enthusiastically frying their food in hydrogenated textile waste. The corporate elite had pulled off the greatest industrial trick in human history. They turned a toxic, illegal industrial pollutant into a highly profitable kitchen staple. The rise of industrial margarine triggered an immediate, vicious economic war with the traditional dairy industry. Powerful dairy lobbies across the globe realized that this cheap chemical competitor would completely destroy their livelihoods. They used their immense political influence to launch a massive legislative counterattack. In the United States and Canada, politicians passed absurd, restrictive laws to protect natural butter. They placed heavy, punitive taxes on every pound of white margarine sold in stores. They strictly prohibited manufacturers from adding yellow coloring to the product. They wanted to ensure it looked unappealing to consumers. Several states mandated that margarine must be dyed a vivid, unnatural pink color. Some jurisdictions even demanded it be colored pitch black. They wanted to weaponize social shame against poor shoppers who could not afford real dairy. In the United States, the political battle over margarine reached levels of absolute absurdity. The state of Wisconsin became the heart of the anti-margarine resistance movement. Local dairy farmers formed powerful militant coalitions to terrorize store owners who attempted to stock the cheap substitute. Politicians in Washington passed the Oleomargarine Act of 1886. This federal law imposed a massive discriminatory tax on the product. It forced retailers to pay an exorbitant annual license fee just to put margarine on their shelves. The legislation also forced manufacturers to use distinct, unattractive packaging to prevent fraud. Despite these legal barriers, the economic demand for cheap fat was completely unstoppable. A highly lucrative black market emerged across the country. Smugglers known as color bootleggers began transporting illegal yellow margarine across state lines in the dead of night. They hid the contraband shipments in secret compartments inside dairy trucks. Families would gather in secret basements to purchase the forbidden yellow fat. It was a bizarre corporate preview of the Prohibition era. As I sit behind this massive oak desk, adjusting my crisp white collar in the soft volumetric fog, I see the absolute irony of this historical moment. The corporate elite did not surrender to these bizarre, colorful laws. Instead, they engineered a brilliant loophole. They began packing a small capsule of yellow dye inside every single block of white margarine. Families had to manually knead the chemical dye into the white fat at their kitchen tables. This domestic chore turned into a strange, shared ritual for millions of impoverished households. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. The corporate lobby did not just fight these state laws in court. They slowly bought the entire political apparatus from the inside out. Now, take a brief moment to hit the subscribe button below this video to uncover more hidden histories of the everyday objects that control your life. This simple click helps us continue our deep archival investigations into the dark mechanisms of global capitalism. The outbreak of the Second World War changed the global fat landscape forever. Global trade routes were completely severed by military blockades. Traditional dairy production plummeted as farm laborers were drafted into military service. Governments were forced to ration butter strictly for soldiers fighting on the front lines. The civilian populations faced a severe, immediate calorie deficit. In this moment of deep national crisis, state governments completely abandoned their protectionist dairy laws. They actively ordered factories to produce mass quantities of margarine to sustain the domestic workforce. Margarine was no longer a shameful substitute for the poor. It was rebranded as a patriotic necessity for survival. By the time the war ended, consumer habits had permanently shifted. An entire generation of children had grown up without ever tasting real dairy butter. They were entirely accustomed to the texture and flavor of hydrogenated plant lipids. Corporate executives realized they had won the physical battle for the consumer's palate. Now, they needed to win the psychological war to secure permanent market dominance. In the mid-20th century, corporate food giants launched a massive, coordinated disinformation campaign. They weaponized the growing public fear of cardiovascular disease. They realized they could use corrupted science to demonize natural fats permanently. Powerful corporate syndicates began flooding medical research institutions with immense financial grants. They specifically funded scientists who were willing to blame natural saturated fats for the rising rates of heart attacks. A prominent American physiologist named Ansel Keys published his famous 7-country study. This research purported to prove a direct, undeniable link between dietary cholesterol and coronary heart disease. What nobody knew at the time was that his data was completely manipulated. He intentionally excluded data from countries that did not fit his preconceived hypothesis. He hid the statistics from nations where people consumed high amounts of animal fat but remained completely healthy. The corporate food lobby eagerly seized upon this deeply flawed study. They used their immense wealth to co-opt the American Heart Association. In 1948, a small, struggling professional group called the American Heart Association received a sudden, massive financial windfall. The corporate executives at Procter & Gamble chose this specific organization to be the beneficiary of their popular radio contest. They presented the Medical Association with a check for millions of dollars. This single corporate donation transformed the small group overnight into a powerful national authority on cardiovascular health. Soon after receiving this corporate funding, the association began aggressively endorsing industrial vegetable oils. They publicly certified hydrogenated fats as heart-healthy alternatives to natural dairy. Medical doctors who raised concerns about these synthetic products were systematically silenced or denied research funding. The entire medical establishment was effectively bought and paid for by the industrial fat industry. This financial capture allowed corporate executives to dictate national health policy for generations. They created a highly profitable closed loop where their toxic product was protected by medical authority. They systematically pressured government agencies to alter their official dietary guidelines. In 1977, the United States government issued its first official dietary goals. These guidelines explicitly urged citizens to slash their consumption of natural butter, eggs, and meat. The public was told to replace these traditional foods with industrial vegetable oils and chemically altered margarine. This official policy shift was a monumental victory for corporate profit margins. Manufacturing a pound of natural butter requires several gallons of fresh milk from real cows. This process requires vast tracts of agricultural land, animal feed, and complex logistics. It is an expensive, slow, and naturally limited endeavor. In stark contrast, manufacturing a pound of margarine costs mere pennies. It requires only cheap, mass-produced commodity crops like soybeans, corn, and cotton seeds. Factories can pump out millions of tons of this industrial grease every day without needing a single farm animal. The profit margins were absolutely astronomical. To ensure total compliance, corporate marketing departments launched an aggressive campaign of weaponized shame. They ran nationwide advertisements that targeted dedicated wives and mothers. These commercials told women that feeding their husbands real butter was an act of slow, deliberate murder. They claimed that switching to synthetic margarine was the only way to protect their families from sudden heart failure. Millions of loving mothers swallowed this corporate lie completely. They threw away natural, nutrient-dense foods. They replaced them with tubs of chemically altered trans fats. The macro consequences of this dietary shift were catastrophic for global public health. Hydrogenation does not just make oil solid. It creates a completely artificial molecule known as a trans fatty acid. The human body does not possess the evolutionary mechanisms to process these synthetic structures. When a person consumes trans fats, these molecules integrate into their cellular membranes. They make the cell walls stiff and rigid. They cause immediate systemic inflammation throughout the entire vascular system. They rapidly elevate dangerous low-density lipoprotein cholesterol while stripping away protective high-density cholesterol. This corporate food experiment triggered a massive, global epidemic of cardiovascular disease. Millions of people suffered from premature heart attacks and strokes. The rates of type 2 diabetes skyrocketed across every developed nation. Think about that for a second. Industrial trans fats killed more people than several major global wars combined. Yet, for decades, corporate executives knowingly concealed this internal medical evidence. They continued to market their chemical grease as a health food to maximize quarterly profits. They prioritized corporate wealth over human survival. By the late 1980s, the industrial fat cartel faced a new threat from tropical climates. Natural palm oil and coconut oil were gaining popularity in food manufacturing. These tropical lipids are naturally solid at room temperature without requiring any chemical hydrogenation. They are completely free of dangerous trans fats. This natural alternative threatened the multi-billion-dollar domestic soybean and cottonseed industries. In response, the American soybean lobby launched a ferocious, xenophobic smear campaign against tropical oils. They funded aggressive media advertisements that labeled palm oil as an Asian poison. They claimed that tropical fats would cause instant, fatal clogging of the arteries. They weaponized public health anxiety to force food corporations to remove natural tropical oils from their recipes. This forced manufacturers to switch back to domestic hydrogenated soybean oil. The public was once again forced to consume toxic, industrial trans fats. The corporate monopoly over human metabolism was maintained through absolute deception and political corruption. This corporate manipulation completely reshaped the physical infrastructure of the modern world. It directly influenced the architectural design of modern supermarkets. If you walk into any grocery store today, you will notice something peculiar. The entire center aisles are packed with boxes, bags, and plastic containers. These processed foods have an incredibly long, unnatural shelf life. They can sit under harsh fluorescent lights for years without rotting. This artificial stability is achieved primarily through the use of hydrogenated industrial fats. These chemical lipids do not spoil because bacteria cannot consume them. Even microorganisms refuse to eat this synthetic material. The global trade network also relies entirely on these engineered lipids. It allows multinational corporations to ship cheap food components across vast oceans without refrigeration. This creates a highly profitable system of globalized dependency. It completely destroyed local, sustainable food economies. It replaced them with a centralized corporate food monopoly. Humanity has been trapped in an artificial chemical loop for over a century. We are completely surrounded by the legacy of a military experiment born in 1869. When the medical evidence against trans fats became completely undeniable in the early 21st century, international health organizations finally stepped in. Governments around the world began passing strict bans on industrial hydrogenation. You might think this regulatory action marked the ultimate defeat of the cheap fat conspiracy. But the corporate food giants were already 10 steps ahead of the lawmakers. They quickly developed a new chemical manipulation process called interesterification. This complex laboratory technique rearranges the fatty acids within a blend of liquid and solid oils. It alters the molecular structure to create a solid fat without producing trans fatty acids. Today, in 2026, these interesterified fats have quietly replaced traditional margarine in thousands of processed foods. However, emerging independent medical studies suggest a deeply disturbing reality. These new chemically engineered lipids may cause severe disruptions to liver function and glucose metabolism. The corporate elite simply replaced one chemical hazard with another to protect their massive profit margins. Human biology remains an ongoing testing ground for industrial profit. The simplicity of the everyday margarine tub on your breakfast table masks a colossal macroeconomic reality. It represents centuries of political manipulation, scientific forgery, and corporate warfare. We are forced to navigate a toxic nutritional minefield designed entirely by corporate accountants. Our bodies are no longer entirely our own. They are the products of an ongoing industrial experiment designed to harvest cheap capital from human flesh. This corporate fat model was not contained within the borders of Western nations. Food conglomerates systematically exported this cheap, industrial lipid technology to developing countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They aggressively marketed margarine and hydrogenated oils as symbols of modern, sophisticated Western living. In many traditional cultures, natural fats like ghee, coconut oil, or unrefined palm oil were staples for centuries. Corporate marketing campaigns successfully convinced local populations that these ancestral fats were primitive and hazardous to health. Millions of people abandoned their local, nutrient-rich agricultural traditions in favor of cheap, imported industrial grease. This caused a rapid globalization of chronic metabolic diseases. Developing nations began facing a dual burden of malnutrition and rampant cardiovascular disease. The corporate elite successfully colonized the global dietary infrastructure. They turned diverse human populations into uniform consumers of their highly profitable, mass-produced chemical waste products. The structural reality of this cheap fat conspiracy created a deep, permanent class divide in global health outcomes. Today, wealthy individuals can easily afford expensive, organic, grass-fed butter and pristine cold-pressed oils. They possess the financial means and the educational access to escape the industrial chemical loop. Meanwhile, lower-income families remain completely trapped by their economic realities. The cheapest, most affordable foods on supermarket shelves are universally packed with engineered interesterified lipids. Corporate manipulation has effectively turned healthy nutrition into a premium luxury item. Poor health is no longer a matter of mere genetic bad luck. It is a direct consequence of socioeconomic subjugation. The corporate food system continues to weaponize economic necessity against the most vulnerable segments of society. We are living in a world where our very cellular health is determined by our financial net worth. The cheap fat conspiracy achieved its ultimate goal of absolute bodily control. I slowly closed this massive leather-bound folio, returning to the dim shadow of 1869. Human systems change, but the core mechanisms of control remain exactly the same. Subscribe if this hidden history surprised you. Click the video on your screen now to dive deeper into our archive.